The thermal feed showed 43 moving signatures. Skethval, sub-regent of the Vethkai 3rd Expeditionary Force, reviewed the count 3 times. It did not change. 43 humans remained combat functional in the trenches below Sector 9, down from 312 at dawn. His forces numbered 4,000. The arithmetic of this engagement had never been in question. And yet Sector 9 had not fallen. He leaned closer to the tactical lens. The human signatures were dim with injury and exhaustion, their metabolic heat ragged and uneven. By Vethkai physiological doctrine, any organism registering below 70% thermal output was functionally non-combatant. Pain suppression at that level required complete withdrawal. The chemicals demanded it. The chemistry did not lie. He watched one signature in particular. It moved differently from the rest. Not the low careful crouch of a soldier conserving strength, but a fast purposeful zigzag between positions. Too fast for someone injured. But the thermal reading was wrong. This individual was running at 61% output, his analyst confirmed. Arm trauma. Significant blood loss. Running anyway. The signature stopped beside a fallen body. Stayed there for 40 seconds. Then the fallen signature, dim, almost extinguished, flagged as a casualty in 3 separate reports, flickered. And began to rise. Skethval checked the timestamp. 12 minutes since that body had gone down in the last bombardment. He had watched it fall himself. Analyst. His voice was quiet. Explain. The analyst, a junior assessor named Ureth, young enough that his chitin still carried the pale sheen of adolescence, studied his own feed. Said nothing for a long moment. The moving signature, Ureth finally answered, appears to be repairing the fallen ones. Skethval said nothing. In the trench below, the small fast figure had already moved to the next body. In the gray smoke of the valley, a single yellow emergency flare bobbed in its hand. One point of brutal human brightness in the dark, moving like a signal fire in a storm. 43 signatures. Down from 312. But they were not continuing to go down. They were going back up. The intercepted human transmissions were mostly noise, broken syllables, code fragments, static. The translation matrices strained against human vocal patterns and slang. But one designation appeared again and again in the audio feeds, spoken in tones that Skethval's emotion analysis software flagged inconsistently, fear becoming steadiness, despair becoming something the software had no category for. Pain, followed immediately by resolve. The software reported an error. Attempted reanalysis. Produced the same result. Doc. Not a rank. Not a unit identifier. Just, document repeated across 63 separate transmissions in 4 hours. What is a doc? Skethval asked. Ureth pulled the cross-referenced intelligence. A human medical designation, sir. Battlefield trauma care specialist. Not classified as primary combat personnel. Then why does our targeting array keep flagging this unit as the highest priority threat in the sector? Ureth was quiet again. He had a careful quality to his silences, he processed before speaking, which was rare among junior staff and occasionally useful. Because, the young assessor said slowly, when we eliminate a combat unit, the threat count decreases by 1. When we eliminate this unit, he paused. We have attempted to eliminate this unit 4 times in 6 hours. Each time, the threat count does not decrease. It increases. Below, the small figure moved between 2 collapsed defenders near the eastern embankment. The yellow flare had been extinguished. It navigated the bombed-out trench entirely in the dark now, moving by memory and by the knowledge of its own terrain. It worked without hesitation. Without slowing. Skethval pulled the individual service record from the intercepted data cache. It took time, decryption was slow, but the broad lines emerged. Selvam, Murugan. Combat Medical Specialist E6. Age, 29. 7 prior deployments. Decorated. Currently assigned, Sector 9 Forward Medical. 29 years old. 7 deployments. He ran the calculation. This human had been in active combat zone since approximately age 22. 7 years of this. He's not afraid, Ureth murmured, almost to himself, not quite a report. Correct, Skethval said. Now explain why. I cannot, sir. Then we will watch until we can. In the trench, in the cold dark below the ridge, Murugan Selvam worked. He did not think about the count. He had learned, over 7 deployments, for continents, and one very bad night in a river valley he never spoke about anymore, that thinking about the count was how you stopped. So he did not count. He moved. He assessed. He worked. Left knee, packed and wrapped, soldier can walk, do not let him run. Right shoulder, through and through, clean, sealed, back in 60 seconds. His left arm had stopped cooperating around the 4th hour. He had noted the shrapnel fragment with the professional detachment of a man cataloging damage to equipment, location, depth, estimated motor interference, and then continued, because the arm still moved and movement was the only standard that mattered in this particular hour. Private Osei Mensah grabbed his sleeve. Ghanaian, 22, first deployment, should have been home next month. Doc. The kid's voice was fraying at the edges. How many we got left? Enough, Murugan said. That's not a number. No, Murugan agreed, it's not. He finished the pressure wrap and pressed the kid's hand flat against it. Hold that. 30 seconds. Count out loud if you need to. 1, Mensah said. Murugan was moving again before he heard 2. At 14:07, Skethval authorized a targeted pole strike on the Sector 9 medical coordinates. This was the correct decision by calculation. Remove the repair function and the remaining signatures would degrade naturally. Vethkai chemical doctrine was unambiguous, wound the healers first. The rest follows. The strike landed precisely. The eastern embankment absorbed the concussion. The sector's south wall buckled. 3 direct casualties registered, a secondary medic and 2 support personnel. The small fast signature spiked with the metabolic signature of acute trauma. For 4 seconds, it went still. Skethval allowed himself the small satisfaction of correct arithmetic. Then the signature moved. Not away from the blast zone. Toward it. Toward the collapsed south wall, where 2 buried soldiers were registering the erratic heat flicker of the critically wounded. The small signature moved to them and stayed. Left arm function has degraded, Ureth reported. Estimated 50% motor capacity remaining. It is still working, Skethval said. Yes, sir. Murugan had been thrown 4 meters by the concussive wave. He'd hit the trench wall, felt something in his left shoulder give, not the shrapnel, something new, and sat on the cold ground for exactly 3 seconds with his eyes closed and his ears ringing. 3 seconds. He had learned that number from a medic instructor who was now dead. 3 seconds, she'd said. 1 for your brain to reset. 1 for your body to report in. 1 to decide. 3 seconds. Then moving. Corporal Nwachukwu was buried to the chest in the collapsed wall. Murugan dug with one hand and both knees, pulled the man free, assessed, ribs cracked, not punctured. He'd heard the difference enough times that he no longer needed to think about it, and packed the worst of the bleeding. Nwachukwu tried to speak. Don't, Murugan said quietly. Breathe first. Talk later. The second buried soldier was worse. Femoral bleed. His kit was nearly gone now, 2 chest seals, one pressure bandage, a small handful of hemostatic gauze. He used the gauze. Then he pulled the yellow flare from his vest. Not a retreat signal. Not a medevac call, the helicopters could not reach them in active bombardment. 8 seconds of light, aimed at the trench junction 200 meters east, where a 17-year-old resupply runner had been doing this same job for 6 months and had never once failed to respond to a yellow flare. Morrigan extinguished the light. Went back to work. Above the ridge, Skethval watched the yellow signal appear and vanish in the wreckage. It meant something. Whatever it meant, it was not surrender. At 15:30, Skethval received the full battle assessment from Central Command. The numbers were, by every metric, in his favor. Human force, reduced to 31 active signatures. Vethkai force, 3,800 effective combatants. Supply lines, stable. Sector 9, contested, not lost. Then why, the Central Command liaison asked flatly, has Sector 9 not fallen? Skethval had no answer that his doctrine would accept. He authorized 200 additional troops and a chemical dispersal strike, low-concentration nerve paralytic, designed to reduce motor function without killing. Enough to bring the last defenders to zero effectiveness. The dispersal units fired at 15:47. He watched the feeds. Human signatures slowed across the board. Metabolic output dropped. Several went stationary. For 40 seconds, Sector 9 looked exactly like a position preparing to collapse. Then the small fast signature. Already at 55% output, arm half-functional, metabolic heat ragged, began moving through the affected zone. It was placing something on each of the slowing signatures. Respirators, Ureth said quietly. He is placing respiratory filters on them. From where? A pause. He has removed his own field jacket, sir. He is tearing it into sections. Using the thermal insulated lining as filter material. Skethval watched. Slowly, the chemical suppression signature stabilized across 11 soldiers. Not all of them, the worst affected were already down. But 11 who had been near collapse held. 31 signatures. Still 31. Sir. Uretha's voice was careful. The injured count is now 67. But the combat functional count has not decreased in, he checked. 4 hours. 4 hours. 67 wounded soldiers. Still 31 functional defenders. The mathematics were wrong. Skethval had not used that word since his earliest training, when it referred to calculation errors made by junior students. He used it now. Below, in the trench, Morrigan knelt over a sergeant named Kowalski, Polish, 34, both eyes full of blood from the pressure wave. Blind. Still asking where to aim. Hold position, Morrigan said. You're anchoring the wall. I can't see the wall, document. Your hands can feel it. Don't let go. He moved to the next. Then the next. At some point the hour became irretrievable and he stopped trying to track it. His body had its own clock now, a simple one, with only 2 positions, working and not working yet. He found himself murmuring. Not instructions. Not coordinates. His mother's voice, somewhere in the back of his skull, had produced a song from his childhood in Chennai, a short repetitive thing about rain on a terracotta roof. He didn't know why it surfaced. He sang it under his breath while he worked, very quietly, to no one in particular. A dying soldier nearby, Corporal Reyes, intestinal wound, morphine long spent, turned his head toward the sound. His breathing slowed. His hands stopped shaking. Morrigan kept singing. Skethval had the audio triangulated at 1604. His linguist provided a translation, a lullaby, South Asian origin, traditional. Non-tactical content. The doc was singing. To his dying. Skethval was still for a long moment. Ureth. Their doctrine on wounded soldiers, you said they do not abandon them. Correct, sir. I understand the data point. I am asking you to explain why. Ureth took his time. When he spoke, his voice had a quality Skethval could not classify. I cannot explain it with our models, sir. Skethval thought about the Vethkai pain cascade. The automatic biological response that slowed an injured unit and spread warning through the collective. The chemistry that told every nearby combatant, this one is finished. Withdraw resources. Move on. It was not cruelty. It was efficiency written into the body at a cellular level. Humans had no such cascade. He had known this fact for years. He had never understood what it meant. Below, quietly, Murugan Selvam pressed his hand against a dying man's chest and said, "Not yet. You don't get to leave yet. I still need you." The universe did not negotiate. But it paused. At 1720, the bombardment paused. Not by order. A resupply delay on the western flank had interrupted the artillery rotation. 22 minutes before the next strike window. The thermal feeds went quiet. The lull settled over Sector 9 like a held breath. No sound but distant artillery on the western front, the ticking of cooling metal, and the low specific sound of men not yet dead deciding how to spend a silence. Ureth watched Feed 7 without speaking. Feed 7 showed the eastern access point, a notch in the collapsed embankment that had become a pocket of relative shelter. The small signature had stopped moving. For the first time in the hours Ureth had been watching, it simply sat. Against the cold trench wall. Knees up. Head back. Doing nothing at all. A second signature moved into frame. Young metabolic output, Ureth estimated late teens. The young soldier sat down beside the dock without being invited. Without speaking. Two figures in a hole in the ground during a pause in their own dying. Neither one said anything for a long time. "You scared?" the doc asked. His translation implant provided the words instantly. Ureth did not need them. The tone was enough. "Yes," the young soldier said. A pause. Then. "Good. Fear means your brain works. Stupid people aren't scared." The young one made a sound, involuntary, brief. Not quite a laugh. Something between a laugh and a breath. Something Ureth had no species-specific word for. The doc pulled his canteen from the vest. Shook it, checking the level. It was nearly empty. Ureth could see it in the thermal, the small contained mass of liquid almost depleted. He handed it to the young soldier anyway. The young one drank. The doc did not drink. When the soldier tried to return the canteen, the doc waved it off. "Keep it. That's yours, document. I know where to find more." He didn't. Ureth had reviewed the sector supply data 3 hours ago. Water reserves in Sector 9 had been destroyed in the third bombardment. There was no more water to find. Ureth looked at the thermal feed for a long time. Then he looked away. He did not flag the exchange in his report. Did not analyze the metabolic data from those 4 minutes. Did not note the canteen. He had no category for it. In the Vethkai assessment protocols, there was no field for. One person gave their last water to another because the other was 22 years old and afraid, and that was reason enough. There was no field for it because, in Vethkai doctrine, it did not occur. Resources were not distributed at personal cost to non-critical personnel. The chemistry prevented it. The efficiency demanded it. Private Osei Mensah drank the water. Then he picked up his rifle, checked the chamber, and walked back toward the line. Ureth watched him go. "Sir," he said finally. They are not going to stop. Skethval had been watching the same feed. No, he said. They are not. At 1742, the artillery rotation resumed. Skethval sent 400 soldiers into Sector 9. He did so without certainty, which was new, and uncomfortable, like a calculation tool that had begun returning answers it could not justify. He sent them because it was the correct next step in a sequence of correct steps that had produced a result that felt entirely wrong, and he did not know how to proceed except to continue proceeding. 400. Against 31. By the time the Vethkai wave reached the trench line, the 31 human signatures were moving with the particular focused fury of the exhausted and the decided. Not speed. Not strength. Commitment. Murugan Selvam had spent the 22-minute lull patching every defender he could reach, and the ones who could stand were standing, and the ones who could hold a weapon were holding one. Mensa, who had been shaking in a wall pocket that morning, 19 years old and terrified, was on the eastern embankment now with a steady hand and Doc's water still in him. The Vethkai wave was overwhelming. It hit the human line like a tide against a breakwater. The breakwater bent. Did not break. Murugan had passed exhaustion some time ago and moved into the physiological territory beyond it, a place he'd been twice before in 7 deployments, where the body simply continues because it has forgotten it was allowed to stop. His left arm was wrong in ways he was cataloging for later. For when there was a later. A Vethkai soldier broke through the southern section. Large. They were all large. Vethkai infantry were built for impact, exoskeletal and dense. This one had come through a collapsed barricade gap and was now standing directly in the medical pocket, weapon raised. Aimed at the Doc. Murugan turned. He did not run. Somewhere around his third deployment, running had stopped being a thing his body offered as an option when a patient was behind him. A hand caught the weapon barrel. Not Murugan's hand. The hand belonged to Corporal Reyes, intestinal wound, no morphine, the one who had been asking where to aim when he couldn't see the wall. Reyes, who by every honest medical calculation Murugan had quietly run should not have been upright. Reyes, who had been standing 2 meters behind the Doc for the past hour because there was nowhere else he intended to be. The shot went sideways. The recoil impact drove Reyes to one knee. He did not fall further. "I've got you," Murugan said, and caught him before he could. The Vethkai soldier stood over both of them. Weapon still raised. Target available. Every tactical protocol pointed at the same action. It did not fire. Ureth would file no satisfactory report on the next 6 seconds. What his instruments recorded was this: the soldier lowered its weapon. Stepped back twice. Then 4 steps. Then turned and moved away from the medical pocket, back into the fighting, where it engaged with human combatants without approaching the Doc again. No wound. No command. No fear, not the chemical kind. Something else. At 1819, the first Vethkai unit began withdrawing from the eastern edge of Sector 9. Not routing. Withdrawing. Organized, deliberate, flanks covered. A professional retreat conducted by professional soldiers who had run the mathematics themselves and arrived, without speaking it aloud, at the same conclusion Skethval had been circling for hours. The numbers were correct. The numbers were not sufficient. By 1847, Sector 9 was quiet. Skethval sat with the reports for a long time before touching them. 400 soldiers dispatched. 41% casualties. Human force, reduced to 26 functional signatures in a sector that had entered the day with 312. By every metric, he had won this engagement. He had also left the field. The 2 facts sat side by side in his assessment log, unresolved and entirely accurate. He pulled up the thermal feed. Sector 9, 1904. Quiet wreckage. Cold ground. The particular stillness of a place that has been fought over and is now, for the moment, simply waiting for the next thing. The small signature was still moving. Slower now. Much slower. Metabolic output critically low, an hour, maybe less, before the body would stop regardless of intentions. The left arm had largely ceased. The right was compensating in the overloaded way of a system past its original parameters. Still moving. The young soldier, Mensa, was moving with it. Walking behind, carrying the supply kit that the figure could no longer lift. Saying nothing. Just carrying. Ureth entered quietly. "Sir. Shall I request artillery support for a second engagement window? We could reclaim Sector 9 within." "No." A pause. "Sir." "No." Ureth did not ask again. 3 days after the engagement at Sector 9, the Vethkai High Command received Sub-Regent Skethval's formal battle assessment. It was unusually brief for a document of its type. The tactical section contained standard engagement data, casualty rates, resource expenditures, territorial outcome. The recommendation section contained a single line. Recommend disengagement. Enemy combatants demonstrate tactical regeneration incompatible with standard engagement protocols. No general commented on the phrasing. The file was quietly archived in the category reserved for assessments that contained data the High Command preferred not to formally acknowledge. In Sector 9, as the last light of that evening folded behind the ridge, Murugan Selvam sat against the cold earth with his kit open beside him and his hands finally still. He did not feel victorious. He felt the way he always felt after. Scraped thin and very quiet, like a piece of metal worked past its original shape into something new that doesn't quite have a name yet. Mensa sat nearby. Didn't speak. The kid had learned somewhere in the past 14 hours when words helped and when they did not. They did not, right now. Murugan closed his eyes. Not in defeat. Not in triumph. In the particular wordless exhaustion of a man who had been asked, 67 times in a single day, whether the people in his care were going to make it, and had answered, 67 times, with his hands instead of his mouth, and who had been right, in the end, not because of certainty or training or any battlefield doctrine, but because he had simply refused, with great stubbornness and very little grace, to accept any other answer. The universe had offered him the alternative, several times. He had ignored it every time. Above the ridge, in the cooling dark of the command position, Ureth sat alone with a blank report document and a word he could not translate and the image, still clear, still unclassifiable, of a man handing his last water to a frightened child in a trench. He had no category for it. He thought, perhaps, he never would.